The accepted ages for the layers of rock was set in the 1830s. 120 years later, radiometric ages were accepted if they matched the geologic column. And they were rejected, not published in the peer-reviewed journals, if they did not. So if it doesn't match the geologic column and you write an article about it, say, look, I found this fossil, I dated it, here's what I come up with, and you try to get somebody to peer review it, they will reject it. Well, this doesn't match what we all teach. So you can't get it published in peer-reviewed journals, can you? Carbon dating, conclusion. Anthropological Journal of Canada, back in 1981. The underlying assumptions have been strongly challenged. It should be no surprise then that fully half of the dates are rejected. Wait, they carbon date things and half of the dates they come up with are rejected. Why? They don't match the geologic column. Ah, now I'm getting to see the picture. The wonder is that the remaining half came to be accepted. Good question. I bet Robert E. Lee got fired for writing that.
The Bering Strait is home to a theory of the same name, crucial to this evolutionary tale of human development. The Bering Strait was a frozen landmass connecting continents, crucial in explaining primitive man's travel across them. A modern historical paradigm, not only explaining the migration of man to the rest of the world, but it must have been at a particular specific time in history to fit currently funded scholarly accepted opinion on the development of man. Virginia Steen McIntyre, however, found fossils, stone tools, and strata dating back 200,000 years earlier than academically accepted. She was told to either repeat the excavation and provide fitting dates, or her findings would be thrown out. She stood by her research and eventually lost her funding. These controversial findings are orders of magnitude older than the scientific consensus for habitation of the New World, which generally traces widespread human migration to the New World to a maximum of 13,000 to 16,000 years ago." End quote. Although these two sites are a considerable distance from one another, they are crucial for the chronological storyline of modern claims regarding timelines of human migration/habitation dates. Although Wikipedia predictably attempts retorts to these claims, to their credit, they have listed a vast array of incredibly talented, highly qualified specialists, along with their own testimonies and personal investigative conclusions, supporting the work of Virginia Steen McIntyre. It's also to its credit that they note the harassment received by these pioneers, who literally threw the rules out of the window in pursuit of the truth. Quote, Steen McIntyre claims that some of the original research team were harassed, viewed as incompetent, or saw their careers hampered due to their involvement in such a controversial and anomalous investigations. End quote. She would eventually lose access to funding, lambasted for her finds and claims never ceasing.
People talk glibly about science. What is science? People coming out of a university with a master's degree or a PhD, you take them into the field and they're literally don't believe anything unless it's a peer-reviewed paper. It's the only thing they accept. And you say to them, but let's observe, let's think, let's discuss. They don't do it. It's just, is it in a peer-reviewed paper or not? That's their view of science. I think it's pathetic. Gone into universities as bright young people. They come out of them brain dead, not even knowing what science means. They think it means peer-reviewed papers, etc. No, that's academia. And if a paper is peer-reviewed, it means everybody thought the same, therefore they approved it. An unintended consequence is that when new knowledge emerges, new scientific insights, they can never, ever be peer-reviewed. So we're blocking all new advances in science that are big advances. If you look at the breakthroughs in science, almost always they don't come from the center of that profession. They come from the fringe. The finest candle makers in the world couldn't even think of electric lights. They don't come from within. They often come from outside the breaks. We're going to kill ourselves because of stupidity.
The only thing left for evolutionists to argue that the Earth is old is radiometric dating. And since it cannot get the dates of known ages correct, what makes us believe that it's reliable for rocks of unknown ages correct? Clearly, it is not only unreliable, but the fact that we know today that super heavy elements rapidly decay into stable radiometric isotopes that date millions or billions of years old, even though they were just formed, proves that radiometric dating is no longer evidence for evolution or anything else for that matter. It doesn't matter how consistent their decay rates become after it cools, because the early stages of their formation have shown us that they actually form rapidly from super heavy elements through the process of Z-pinch, where these elements are quickly fissioned and decay into subatomic particles, isotopes, and radioactive elements. Not only that, when they do form, they form in the arrangement of elements that matches exactly what we find on Earth's crust today, observed at the Proton 21 laboratories in Ukraine.
It's like finding a watch on the ground, and even though it tells perfect time, you cannot rewind the clock back to determine when it was made. Does it matter how accurate the watch is? Of course not. Is the radiometric half-life decay not accurate? Of course it is. It's the assumptions behind radiometric dating for dating the age of the Earth that was in question and has now been falsified. And we now know that it can no longer be used to date anything or to get a true answer for the age of the Earth.
Evolutionists claim that the Earth's radioactive elements came from material that evolved inside a star that exploded and the debris later formed to create Earth. But now we know stars cannot create any element above iron, so how could their theory be true? It can't. Evolution has been dealt its death blow regarding radiometric dating. But what about the Earth? They have been telling us that Earth's core has three main sources of energy, which are potassium, uranium, and thorium. If this is the case, then why don't we find more of it the deeper we go? Clearly, over billions of years, these heavy elements, like uranium, would be concentrated in the core. And if this were the case, then the oldest uranium would be at the core. And as it rises at the mid-Atlantic ridge, then logically, the closer you get to the ridge, the older the dating of the rocks would be. However, the exact opposite is true. The further you get from the ridge, the older the dates become. Now think about it. Over millions of years, uranium would have made its way into the core of the Earth. This would be the oldest uranium, as it would have taken the longest amount of time to get there. Then, it would have pushed its way up through convection at the mid-Atlantic ridge. Therefore, the further you get from the ridge, the younger the uranium would date. Since we find the exact opposite is true, and the further away you get, the older the dates become, this is an invalidation of that theory. And now they admit that experiments show that there is no uranium or thorium at Earth's core. So the idea of the slow geologic process and the dates along the mid-Atlantic ridge prove nothing in regards to how old the Earth is. This is best explained by Noah's flood. As when the fountains of the great deep broke forth and opened at this location, the water currents pushed away from it these radioactive elements which settled into the newly formed rock layers. This also explains why 90% of the heavy elements uranium and thorium are on the crust of the Earth and not deep within the mantle. It also explains why lower rocks in the crust of the Earth date older than on top, since radioactive elements are dated older have more atomic weight. So we see uranium, which dates the oldest, in the lower levels because it weighs more, and the lighter elements on the top, which date much younger. So, if young Earth creation were true, then nearly all of the radioactive elements would be concentrated on the crust because of Noah's flood. If evolution were true and deep time, this would have allowed the elements to sink all the way into the core. What do we find? 90% of all radioactive elements are in the crust of the Earth. But if that's not bad enough, distribution is very uneven. 50% of all the radioactive elements are in Australia alone.
All the strange words make sense!
You see, Charles Lyell was a lawyer from England and a novice geologist, and he made up the geologic column that we have today. He did this with the intent of removing the biblical science from the education system, and it worked perfectly. Even though he made the entire thing up and admitted it, and Darwin took his work and expanded on it, the entire thing is based on a lie.